I am Aisha Johnson, 32 years old, a logistics sergeant in the United States Army, and the youngest daughter of a prestigious family. I am sitting in a freezing military hearing room, facing my own brother, Marcus, the man who is accusing me of falsifying records. But the fatal blow does not come from him. It arrives when the heavy oak door opens, and my parents walk in. They do not look at me. Not once. My mother, clutching her expensive Hermes bag, and my father, holding a sworn affidavit against his own daughter, walk right past me to sit behind the accuser. My chest feels like it is being crushed as I realize they are willing to send me to prison just to protect my brother's million-dollar contracts. They think my silence is submission. They have no idea that what I am holding in my hand, the incident log, will overturn everything and burn down the career of the golden son they worship. Let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that subscribe button right now if you believe that sometimes the most painful betrayal comes from the people who share your blood. The hearing room at Fort Liberty smelled of lemon antiseptic and old fear. It was a sterile, windowless box designed to strip a soldier of their confidence before a single word was spoken. I sat alone, my hands resting flat on the cold oak table. I had no expensive defense attorney whispering in my ear, no support team. There was only the rhythmic, maddening tick-tock of the wall clock, counting down the seconds to my public execution. Across from me, Marcus was arranging his documents with the practiced ease of a CEO preparing for a hostile takeover. He looked completely out of place in this sea of olive drab and camouflage, yet he dominated the room. He was wearing a navy blue Armani suit that I knew cost $3,000, more than what most of the enlisted soldiers on this base made in a month. He did not look at me. To him, I was not a sister. I was a glitch in his spreadsheet, a rounding error that needed to be deleted so the fiscal year would look profitable. Then the heavy door at the back of the room creaked open. I held my breath. It was a stupid, instinctive reflex, the childish part of my brain that still craved a safety net. Maybe, I thought, maybe they are here to stop this. My father, Bob, and my mother, Linda, stepped into the room. My mother looked immaculate. Her hair was blown out to perfection, stiff with hairspray, and she wore a pastel cardigan draped over her shoulders like the quintessential Virginia country club wife. My father walked with the stiff posture of a man who believes his bank account gives him moral superiority. He nodded respectfully at Colonel Whitman, the presiding officer. "Good morning, Colonel," my father said, his voice warm and rich. But then they had to walk past me. I turned my head slightly, trying to catch my mother's eye. Just a glance. A flicker of recognition. Anything. Nothing. She stared straight ahead, her knuckles white as she gripped the handle of her Hermes Birkin bag. My father looked through me as if I were a piece of old, dusty furniture that had been left in the hallway. They did not slow down. They did not hesitate. They walked right past the table where their daughter sat facing a court-martial inquiry and pulled out the chairs directly behind Marcus. The scrape of those chair legs against the linoleum floor was louder than a gunshot. It was a physical declaration of war. In the military, we talk about having someone's six, watching their back. My parents had just publicly taken position at my enemy's six. They were not just bystanders, they were reinforcements for the other side. The air in the room seemed to vanish. My lungs burned. This was the Blue Falcon concept. The Buddy F. Kicker, the traitor, but played out with my own DNA. Marcus cleared his throat, sensing the shift in power. He stood up, buttoning his jacket with a crisp snap. He began his opening statement, a speech I knew he had rehearsed in front of a mirror. "Colonel Whitman," Marcus began, his voice smooth and projecting the false humility of a patriot. "I appear here today not as a brother, but as a concerned tax-paying citizen and a defense contractor committed to integrity. It is with a heavy heart that I must report that my sister, Sergeant Aisha Johnson, has engaged in a pattern of deception regarding her military service record." He paused for effect, letting the silence hang heavy in the recycled air. "Specifically," Marcus continued, pointing a manicured finger at the screen, "she is guilty of stolen valor." Stolen valor. The term hit me like a physical slap. In our world, that is the ultimate insult. It is reserved for liars who pin medals they didn't earn onto their chests, for cowards who play dress-up in uniforms soaked in the blood of better men. Marcus was using it to describe me, a woman who had hauled supplies through the most dangerous supply routes in the Middle East, while he sat in an air-conditioned office in Arlington. He spoke about my service as if I were an employee who had been stealing staplers from the supply closet. Cold, clinical, fake responsibility dripping from every syllable. Colonel Whitman, a man whose face was etched with the lines of actual combat, shifted his gaze to me. His eyes were hard to read. "Sergeant Johnson," Whitman said, his voice gravelly, "do you wish to make an opening statement? Do you wish to refute these claims immediately?" From behind Marcus, I heard a sound that cut deeper than the accusation. My mother sighed. It was a soft, sharp exhale, the specific sound of disappointment I had been hearing for 32 years. It was the sound she made when I chose the Army instead of a marketing degree. The sound she made when I came home with grease under my fingernails instead of an engagement ring from a doctor. I looked up. I locked eyes with Marcus. He was smiling. It wasn't a wide grin. It was a subtle, tight lifting of the corners of his mouth. He was waiting for me to break. He wanted me to scream. He wanted crazy Aisha to make a scene so he could look at the colonel and shrug, as if to say, "See? She is unstable." I remembered my drill sergeants at basic training. Panic is a choice. Chaos is external. Discipline is internal. I placed my hands under the table. I made a fist, squeezing so hard that I felt my fingernails puncture the skin of my palm. The sharp sting of pain grounded me. It kept the tears from rising. It kept the rage from exploding. "No, sir," I said. My voice did not tremble. It was flat, dead, and absolute. The smile on Marcus's face faltered for a fraction of a second. He didn't understand. He thought my silence was surrender. He thought he had won because his little sister was too crushed to fight back. He didn't know I wasn't surrendering. I was just chambering around. But as I stared at him, that look in his eyes, that mixture of arrogance and pity, triggered something visceral in my gut. It wasn't the first time I'd seen that expression. The courtroom dissolved for a split second, and the sterile smell of the base was replaced by the smell of roasted turkey and expensive cologne. That look, it was the exact same look he gave me 2 years ago, the day he decided I was nothing. That look, that specific, condescending tilt of Marcus's head in the courtroom was not new. It was a trigger. It instantly pulled me out of the sterile hearing room at Fort Liberty and dragged me back 2 years, to a crisp November afternoon in Virginia. It was Thanksgiving Day. I had just returned from a 9-month deployment in Syria. I was exhausted, vibrating with the residual adrenaline of a combat zone, driving my beat-up Ford F-150 pickup truck up the long, winding driveway of my parents' estate. My truck was covered in mud, the engine knocking with the fatigue of 100,000 hard miles. And there, parked right in the center of the driveway like a black diamond, was Marcus's brand new Porsche 911. The contrast was so sharp it almost hurt my eyes. His car screamed success, leverage, and boardroom bonuses. My truck screamed survival, grit, and minimum wage. I walked into the house through the front door. I was still wearing my OCPs, my operational camouflage pattern uniform. My flight had been delayed, my baggage lost, and I had driven straight here from the airfield because I wanted to see my family. I smelled like jet fuel, stale coffee, and the desert. My mother, Linda, came into the foyer. She was holding a glass of Chardonnay. She stopped 5 feet away from me. She did not open her arms. She did not drop her glass to run and hug the daughter who had been dodging mortar fire for the better part of a year. Instead, her eyes darted immediately to my boots. "Aisha," she said, her voice tight. "Good Lord, you look like a mess. Can't you change out of those dirty clothes before you come into the living room? We just had the sectional sofa reupholstered. That fabric is imported Italian velvet, and it cost your father and me $5,000. I stood there, my duffel bag slipping from my shoulder. $5,000. That was more than the hazard pay I had earned for risking my life. "Hi, Mom," I said quietly. It's good to see you too. She turned around and walked back toward the kitchen. Well, hurry up. Marcus is already carving the turkey. The dinner was a theater production, starring Marcus Johnson. We sat around the mahogany table, laden with roasted turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce, and crystal glasses that chimed when you touched them. Marcus stood up, buttoning his jacket, and cleared his throat. Dad, Marcus said, gesturing to a long, sleek box in the corner of the room. I know you've been eyeing those new drivers. Consider it a small token from my latest contract with the Department of Defense. It's been a lucrative quarter. My father, Bob, tore open the wrapping paper. Inside was a set of custom, gold-plated golf clubs. His face lit up with a joy I had never seen directed at me. He stood up and clapped Marcus on the back, shaking him vigorously. Now this, my father boomed. This is my boy. That business mind of yours is sharp as a tack, son. You're building a legacy. My mother looked at Marcus as if he had just walked on water. The admiration in their eyes was blinding. I looked down at my lap. Under the table, resting on my knee, was my gift. It was a folded American flag. It wasn't new. It was tattered at the edges, stained with the dust of a forward operating base. It had flown over our chow hall during the worst weeks of the shelling. It was a symbol that we had made at home. I had saved it specifically for my father, a man who claimed to love patriotism. But looking at the gold golf clubs, I felt a wave of shame so hot it burned my neck. My flag was dirty. It was used. It was blue-collar. I quietly slid the flag down to the floor, kicking it gently under my chair with my boot. It didn't belong in this room that smelled of money. So, Marcus said, sitting back down and swirling his red wine. How was the camping trip, Aisha? It wasn't camping, Marcus, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We were short on medical supplies near the border. We had guys using duct tape on wounds because the logistics chain broke down. Marcus laughed. It was a dry, dismissive sound. He took a sip of his wine. Oh, come on, little sister. Don't bring that depressing talk to the dinner table. Let's be real. You're basically a truck driver in camouflage. You move boxes of MREs from point A to point B. Don't act like you're some hero in a movie. The table erupted in laughter. My mother covered her mouth, giggling. My father wiped a tear of mirth from his eye and pointed a fork at me. Your brother is right, Aisha. Look at you. You're 30 years old, no husband, wearing combat boots. Why don't you just quit and let Marcus hire you as a secretary? At least you'd make some decent money and look like a woman for a change. The air left my lungs. Look like a woman. I looked down at my plate. The turkey looked like ash. The stuffing looked like sand. I realized then that they didn't care that I had survived an IED explosion just 3 weeks prior. An explosion that had rattled my teeth and left ringing in my ears that still hadn't stopped. To them, my survival wasn't an achievement because it didn't come with a bonus check. I was an extra in their movie. I was the prop they used to feel better about their own success. If you have ever felt like the outsider in your own family, if you have ever sat at a table full of relatives and felt completely alone, please hit the like button and comment, yes, below. Let me know I'm not the only one who has had to swallow that kind of pain. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I just cut a piece of meat and chewed, tasting nothing but bile. But as I watched Marcus hold up his crystal glass, watching the expensive red liquid swirl against the light, I felt something shift inside me. He looked so comfortable, so safe. He had no idea what that red liquid reminded me of. He saw wine. I saw what was on my steering wheel. The red wine in Marcus's glass blurred, spinning faster and faster until it wasn't wine anymore. It dissolved into the thick, red slick coating my hands and the steering wheel of my transport truck. Snap. I was back in the courtroom. Marcus was standing by a large monitor, tapping a laser pointer against a clean, color-coded Excel spreadsheet. As you can see here, Colonel, Marcus said, his voice devoid of any human warmth. The official personnel roster for that day lists my sister as a logistics sergeant, E5. Nothing more. Yet, on the incident report she manually submitted, she signed as acting commander. This is a clear case of impersonation to inflate her service record for future benefits. It is fraud, plain and simple. He looked so smug. He was right about the paper, but he was dead wrong about the life. The air conditioning in the courtroom hummed, but suddenly, I couldn't feel it. The temperature in my mind spiked to 120 degrees Fahrenheit. I could taste the dust. I could smell the overwhelming stench of burning diesel, unwashed bodies, and copper. I was back on Supply Route Bland. It was the main supply line running north, a stretch of asphalt that every insurgent with an IED loved to target. We were a convoy of 12 vehicles hauling ammunition and medical supplies to a forward operating base that was running on fumes. No air conditioning, no Armani suits, just the roar of the engines and the constant gnawing fear in the pit of your stomach. I was driving the lead vehicle, the scout truck. Lieutenant Miller, our convoy commander, was in the passenger seat next to me. He was 24 years old, a kid from Ohio with a fiancée waiting back home. We were talking about college football. He was a Buckeyes fan when the world ended. Boom! The explosion didn't sound like a sound. It felt like a punch to the chest. The vehicle in front of us, a security Humvee, vanished in a cloud of black smoke and debris. Contact front, I screamed, slamming on the brakes. Before the dust even settled, the small arms fire started. Ping! Ping! Thud. Bullets hammered against the armored glass and the door panels like hail. Reverse! Johnson, get us out of... The lieutenant never finished his sentence. A round found the gap in the door armor. There was a wet, sickening sound, and suddenly, the interior of the cab was painted red. Lieutenant Miller slumped forward, blood spraying onto the windshield, turning the bright desert sun into a crimson haze. LT, Lieutenant! I grabbed his vest, pulling him back. His eyes were wide, staring at nothing. He was gurgling. The radio was screaming static and panicked voices. Hitman Actual is down. I repeat, Actual is down. What do we do? We're sitting ducks here. The convoy had stopped in the kill zone, the fatal funnel. According to the pristine standard operating procedures that Marcus loved to quote from his office in Virginia, we were supposed to wait for the next officer in the chain of command to take charge. But the next officer was 4 trucks back, and his radio was dead. We were frozen. 15 soldiers and tons of explosives were sitting still on a highway while shooters on the ridge dialed in their mortars. If we waited for procedure, we would all be dead in 30 seconds. Fear is a cold thing, even in the desert heat. It makes you want to curl up and hide. I looked at the lieutenant bleeding out on my center console. I looked at the radio. I didn't think. I didn't calculate my pay grade. I just acted. I grabbed the mic, my hand slipping because of the blood. I keyed the handset, my voice cutting through the panic on the net. All Victor units, this is Sierra 1, I yelled, using my personal call sign. Actual is down. I am assuming command. Gun trucks 1 and 4, suppress the ridge at 3 o'clock. Give them hell. Convoy, we are pushing through. Do not stop. If a vehicle is disabled, bump it. Driver 2, get on my bumper. We are moving now. My voice was the only thing holding the chaos together. I grabbed my M4 rifle with one hand and steered with the other, driving straight through the smoke of the burning Humvee. I could feel the heat of the flames through the floorboards. I coordinated the fire, calling out targets, screaming at the drivers to keep their spacing. For 12 miles, I wasn't a logistics sergeant. I wasn't a truck driver. I was the only thing standing between my unit and a row of flag-draped coffins. When we finally rolled through the gates of the destination base, the adrenaline crashed. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't unbuckle my seatbelt. The medics swarmed the truck to get the lieutenant. He was alive, barely, because I had gotten him to the trauma center in time. Later that night, sitting on a cot in a tent that smelled of sweat and sand, I tried to write the after-action report. My hands were stained dark brown. No amount of scrubbing could get it off. It was under my fingernails. I opened the incident log, a battered, grease-stained notebook we kept in the truck. I couldn't access the digital portal because the internet was down, so I wrote it by hand. Incident report, Ambush at mile marker 40. Lieutenant Miller incapacitated. Sergeant Johnson assumed acting command. No, KIA. All cargo delivered. I signed it. There was a smear of blood on the page right next to my signature. That notebook was the truth. It was the raw, ugly, beautiful reality of war. But now, in this air-conditioned room, Marcus was pointing at his screen. She logged herself as acting commander, he said, shaking his head with mock disappointment. The digital system shows no field promotion authorized. She simply decided to give herself a title she didn't earn to pad her resume. It's a violation of integrity. He was calling my survival instinct fraud. He was calling the blood under my fingernails a clerical error. I looked at my parents. Surely, they remembered. I had told them this story when I came home, shaking and crying. I had told them how scared I was. My father nodded solemnly at Marcus's words. My mother pursed her lips, looking at me with that familiar disappointment. They didn't see the 15 soldiers who went home to their families because of me. They only saw the error that might hurt their son's government contract compliance rating. They agreed with him. To them, the paper was worth more than the life. The flashback of the burning convoy faded, replaced once again by the sterile chill of the courtroom. My hands were no longer stained with Lieutenant Miller's blood. They were clean, resting on the wooden table, trembling slightly. Marcus was still talking. He was on a roll, pacing back and forth in his Italian leather shoes, pointing at his colorful charts. He spoke about standardization, fiscal responsibility, and workflow optimization. To him, the war was just a logistics problem to be solved with cheaper trucking contracts. And that is why, Colonel, Marcus concluded, buttoning his jacket with a flourish, integrity in reporting is paramount. If we allow soldiers to fabricate their roles, the entire system collapses. He looked at the colonel, expecting a nod of agreement. He expected the camaraderie of one powerful man to another. After all, Marcus was a Johnson. In Virginia, that name opened doors. But Colonel Whitman didn't nod. The old soldier sat behind the raised bench, his face like a piece of weathered granite. He hadn't looked at the screen once during Marcus's entire presentation. Instead, he had been slowly, methodically flipping through the thick stack of paper files in front of him. The silence stretched. It became uncomfortable. Marcus's confident smile began to waver. He cleared his throat. "Colonel?" Marcus asked, his voice losing a bit of its polished sheen. Colonel Whitman finally stopped flipping pages. He looked up. His eyes were narrow, surrounded by crow's feet, carved by years of squinting into the desert sun. They were eyes that had seen things Marcus couldn't even imagine in his worst nightmares. "Mr. Johnson," Whitman said. His voice was deep, a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. "You stated that these records on your screen, the ones proving your sister is a liar, were pulled from the defense contractor portal. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, standing taller. "It is the most up-to-date system we have. It tracks billing and personnel hours for payroll." "Payroll," Whitman repeated the word as if it tasted bad. "So, this is secondary data. It is data entered by civilian administrators in an office in D.C. to calculate paychecks." Marcus blinked. "Well, yes, but it aligns with—" "In the Army, Mr. Johnson," Whitman cut him off. "We do not base a soldier's honor on payroll spreadsheets. We believe in the primary source, the order of the day, the field reports." Whitman gestured to the court reporter. "Clerk, please initiate a priority request to the National Archives for the unit's original field logs. I want the raw data, not the sanitized version this contractor is presenting." The color drained from Marcus's face. He knew exactly what that meant. The contractor portal was clean. It was designed to look good for auditors. The field logs were messy. They contained the truth. Suddenly, behind Marcus, my father stood up. Bob Johnson was not used to being ignored, and he certainly wasn't used to seeing his golden son cornered. He stood up with the indignation of a man who sponsors charity golf tournaments. "Now, see here, Colonel," my father blustered, his voice booming. "My son is a respected businessman. We didn't come here to have his diligence questioned. We came here to settle a family discipline matter that has gotten out of hand." It was a power move. It usually worked at the country club. Colonel Whitman slowly took off his reading glasses. He didn't raise his voice. He simply turned that steel gaze directly onto my father. "Sit down, sir," Whitman said. It wasn't a request. It was a command. "This is a United States military tribunal, not a board meeting. You have no standing here." My father froze. His mouth opened and closed like a fish. He looked around the room, hoping for support, but saw only the stone-faced military police standing guard. For the first time in my life, I saw my father shrink. The aura of money that usually protected him evaporated instantly in the face of real authority. He slumped back into his chair, defeated. Marcus, seeing his father neutralized, panicked. Sweat began to bead on his forehead. He needed a new shield, and he grabbed the closest, cruelest one he could find. "Colonel, please," Marcus stammered, his voice taking on a desperate, pleading tone. "I understand the procedure, but you have to understand the context. Even our parents, the people who raised her, agree that Aisha has issues." He gestured back at our parents, using them as a weapon against me. "She has always been dramatic," Marcus continued, gaining speed. "She has a history of inflating stories to get attention. She's the youngest, you know? A bit of a black sheep. We suspect she might be suffering from some form of PTSD-induced delusions. We are just trying to get her help, not punish her." The room went deathly silent. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. He wasn't just coming for my rank anymore. He was coming for my sanity. He was painting me as the crazy female veteran to save his own skin. And the worst part? My mother was nodding. I could see her in my peripheral vision, looking sadly at the floor, playing the role of the heartbroken mother dealing with a mentally unstable daughter. I waited for the shame. I waited for the colonel to look at me with pity. But Colonel Whitman didn't look at me with pity. He looked at Marcus with disgust. "Mr. Johnson," Whitman said, his voice icy, "I do not care about your family dynamics. I do not care about your parents' opinions on her childhood. In my court, hearsay is irrelevant." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Marcus. "And I suggest you be very careful about diagnosing a soldier with PTSD to suit your narrative. The truth does not live in your parents' living room, and it certainly does not live in your mouth. The truth is found in the actions taken when the bullets are flying. And from where I am sitting, you have never heard a shot fired in anger." Whitman turned to look at me. For a brief second, his expression softened. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. It was a small gesture, but it hit me harder than any bullet. My throat tightened. My eyes burned. Here I was, 32 years old, sitting across from my father, my own flesh and blood, who wouldn't lift a finger to defend me. And yet, this stranger, this old man I had never met until this morning, was standing between me and the wolves. He was protecting me. For the first time that day, the crushing weight on my chest lightened just a fraction. I wasn't alone. But as the colonel called for a 15-minute recess, I made the mistake of looking back at my mother. She wasn't looking at the colonel. She was looking at Marcus, who was trembling. Her eyes narrowed. She wasn't defeated yet. She was calculating. She stood up, smoothed her skirt, and walked toward the door with a terrifying purpose. The court went into a 15-minute recess. I didn't stay in the hallway. I couldn't bear the whispers or the pitying glances from the military police. I ducked into the ladies' restroom, the heavy door sighing shut behind me, cutting off the noise of the corridor. The room was silent, smelling of lavender air freshener and bleach. I leaned over the sink, splashing freezing cold water onto my face. I gasped, letting the water drip from my chin, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were red-rimmed. My uniform, usually a source of pride, felt heavy, like a lead vest. "Just hold it together, Johnson," I told myself. "Just get through the day." Then the door opened. I froze. Through the mirror, I saw her. My mother, Linda. For a split second, a foolish, childish hope sparked in my chest. I thought she had come to check on me. I thought that maybe, just maybe, seeing Colonel Whitman tear into Marcus had woken her up. I thought she was coming to hug me, to tell me she was sorry, to be my mother. I turned around, water still dripping from my face. She didn't look at me. She walked past me to the mirror, placed her Hermes bag on the marble countertop, carefully so the bottom wouldn't get wet, and began to fix a stray lock of her hair. She pulled a tube of lipstick from her purse and reapplied a fresh coat of red. "Aisha," she said, pressing her lips together to settle the color. Her voice was calm, conversational, as if we were discussing the weather and not a court-martial. "How long do you intend to keep up this charade?" I blinked, the water on my face feeling suddenly like ice. "Excuse me?" She finally turned to face me. Her eyes were dry. There was no warmth in them, only the cold calculation of a woman managing a PR crisis. "Marcus is willing to be generous," she said. "He spoke to his legal team during the break. He has a proposal. A way out for you." "I don't need a way out," I said, my voice shaking. "I need the truth." "The truth is expensive, Aisha," she snapped. "And it is messy. Listen to me. Marcus says if you agree to plead guilty to a lesser charge and accept a voluntary administrative discharge for medical reasons, he will drop the fraud lawsuit." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Medical reasons?" "Yes," Linda said, stepping closer. "We have a family friend, Dr. Evans. He's willing to write an evaluation stating that your time in Syria caused severe psychological distress. We can say you have PTSD. We can say you suffer from delusions of grandeur, which is why you fabricated the logbook. You won't go to prison. You'll just be discharged quietly. You can go get therapy. Marcus keeps his security clearance, the company stays afloat, and you get help. It is a win-win." I stared at her, unable to process the level of betrayal. "You want me," I whispered, my throat tight. "You want me to tell the army I'm crazy? You want me to say I hallucinated saving 15 men just to save Marcus's contract?" "Don't be dramatic," she waved a hand dismissively. "It's just paperwork, Isha. It's a label. Who cares?" "I care," I shouted, the sound echoing off the tiled walls. "My honor cares. That label follows me for the rest of my life." Linda's face hardened. The mask of the polite society wife dropped. She stepped forward and grabbed my shoulder. Her fingers were like claws. Her manicured red nails dug into my skin through the fabric of my uniform, pinching hard enough to bruise. "Stop being so selfish," she hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Think about this family for once. Marcus is the pillar of this family. His company pays for the house in Virginia. He pays for the club memberships. He pays for the lifestyle we built. If he loses his clearance because of your stubborn pride, we lose everything." She shook me, just once, violently. "You have always been the difficult one, the black sheep. Now, for the first time in your life, you have a chance to be useful. Don't ruin this." She let go of my shoulder and reached into her expensive bag. She pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I didn't want to use this," she said, her voice turning icy again. "But I will. This is a sworn affidavit I signed this morning. It states that I have witnessed you lying compulsively since you were a teenager. It paints a picture of a mentally unstable girl who has always been jealous of her successful brother." I looked at the paper. It was a weapon forged by my own mother to destroy my credibility forever. "You would perjure yourself?" I asked, tears finally spilling over. "You would lie to a federal court and destroy your own daughter just to protect his money?" "I'm protecting the family," she corrected me. "And right now, you are the threat to this family. If you are listening to this and your heart is pounding because you know exactly what this feels like, if you have ever been the child who was sacrificed to protect the golden child, please hit that like button right now. Comment justice below if you think no mother should ever do this. She wasn't here to comfort me. She was here to execute me. She didn't care if I was right. She didn't care about the 15 lives I saved. She only cared that I was an inconvenience to her retirement plan." Something inside me broke. It wasn't a loud break. It was the quiet, final snap of a tether that had been holding me to these people for 32 years. The little girl who wanted mommy to be proud of her died right there on the bathroom floor. I reached up and slapped her hand away from me. My mother gasped, clutching her hand as if I had burned her. "Aisha!" I wiped my face with my sleeve. When I looked at her, My eyes were dry. You aren't saving the family, Linda, I said. I didn't call her Mom. You are killing your daughter to make an offering to your son's bank account. I stepped around her. I didn't look at the affidavit. I didn't look at her shocked face. Go ahead, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Use the paper, because I'm done protecting you. I walked toward the door. I was leaving the mother I never really had behind in that bathroom. And I was walking back into that courtroom to burn their world to the ground. I pushed open the restroom door and stepped back into the hallway. My face was dry. My eyes were clear. The tears I had shed only moments ago felt like they belonged to a different person, a weaker version of myself that I had left behind on the cold tile floor. My mother was still standing near the entrance, looking at her phone, probably texting Dr. Evans to arrange my diagnosis. She looked up as I walked past her. She opened her mouth to speak, likely to ask if I'd come to my senses, but the look on my face stopped her dead. I didn't look like her daughter anymore. I looked like a soldier clearing a room. I walked back into the hearing room and took my seat. The air was heavy, charged with static. Marcus was leaning back in his chair, checking his gold watch, looking bored. He thought the game was over. He thought his little psychological operation in the hallway had worked. But Colonel Whitman was not looking at his watch. The colonel was holding a single sheet of paper. It wasn't part of the thick file from the archives. It was fresh. I could see the slight curl of the edges from the printer heat. He held it with two hands, reading it one last time, his jaw set in a line of granite. The hearing is back in session, Whitman announced. His voice was different now. It wasn't the voice of an inquisitive judge. It was the voice of a commanding officer who had just discovered a perimeter breach. He didn't look at me. He looked straight at Marcus. Mr. Johnson, Whitman said, the title dripping with disdain. During the recess, my clerk received a very interesting update from the Logistics Command headquarters in Washington, a piece of information that seems to have been conveniently omitted from your opening statement. Marcus straightened his tie, offering a polite, practiced smile. I assure you, Colonel, we have been fully transparent. Have you? Whitman asked. He placed the paper on the desk, smoothing it out slowly. Mr. Johnson, are you aware that 9 days ago, the Department of the Army internally nominated a new contracting officer representative, a COR, for the Northeast Region Logistics Sector? The smile froze on Marcus's face. It didn't fade, it just turned into a rictus of terror. The room went silent, but for me, the pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with the force of a freight train. A COR isn't just a title. In the world of defense contracting, the COR is God. They are the eyes and ears of the government. They are the ones who inspect the goods. They are the ones who sign the invoices. And most importantly, they are the ones who have the authority to reject a shipment and freeze a payment if they smell a rat. For those in the room who are civilians, Whitman continued, his eyes never leaving Marcus. Let me clarify. This nomination was for the exact sector where your company, Johnson Defense Solutions, holds its largest supply contracts. Whitman picked up the paper and read from it. Nominee, Sergeant Aisha Johnson. Status, pending final background check. A gasp rippled through the room. My parents, sitting behind Marcus, looked at each other, confused. They didn't understand the acronyms. They didn't understand that their son's empire was built on cutting corners, and he had just found out that his honest, incorruptible sister was about to become his auditor. You filed this formal complaint about stolen valor, Whitman said, his voice rising. Exactly 24 hours after this nomination was posted on the internal network. You didn't come here to protect the integrity of the Army, Mr. Johnson. You came here to sabotage a background check. Whitman slammed the paper down on the desk. The sound echoed like a gunshot. You are trying to destroy this soldier's career not because she is a liar, but because you know she is telling the truth. You know that if she becomes your COR, you can't buy her, you can't bully her, and you certainly can't bribe her with golf clubs. Marcus turned a sickly shade of gray. Sweat broke out instantly on his forehead, glistening under the fluorescent lights. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. No, that is circumstantial, Marcus stammered. His smooth boardroom baritone cracked into a high-pitched squeak. I filed this out of moral obligation. This is a conflict of interest. The only conflict here, Whitman growled, is between your bank account and federal law. I looked at my parents. My father was staring at the back of Marcus's head, his mouth slightly open. My mother looked pale. For the first time, they weren't looking at a golden boy. They were looking at a fraud. They were realizing that the son they were ready to sacrifice their daughter for wasn't a hero. He was a scared little man who was terrified of being caught. And me? I felt the ice in my chest shatter, but it wasn't replaced by heat. It was replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I looked at Marcus. He was trembling. He was wiping his hands on his $3,000 pants. He looked small. He looked pathetic. I remembered a quote from David Goggins that had gotten me through my darkest nights in the desert. When you take the soul of a man, you own him. Marcus wasn't the big brother anymore. He wasn't the successful CEO. He was just a target who had engaged the wrong enemy. I slowly lifted my head. I caught Marcus's darting, panicked eyes. And then, for the first time in 2 years, I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was a smirk. It was the look of a hunter who has just watched the prey step directly into the trap. You missed, I thought, staring right into his soul. You took your shot, Marcus, and you missed. Now it is my turn. Colonel Whitman did not sit down. He remained standing, towering over the bench like a statue of judgment carved from granite. He pressed a small button on his desk, and the side door opened. A court clerk walked in, carrying something that looked completely out of place in this modern, sterile room. It wasn't a laptop or a USB drive. It was a battered, olive-drab metal lockbox. It was dented on the corners and covered in a fine layer of dust that the courtroom's air filtration system hadn't managed to scrub away. Across the lid, a strip of heavy tape was secured with a thick seal of red wax. Stamped into the wax was the official emblem of the National Archives in St. Louis. Mr. Johnson, Whitman said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. You based your entire lawsuit on the digital contractor portal. You claimed that because an event wasn't typed into your payroll system, it didn't happen. Whitman nodded to the clerk, who broke the wax seal with a loud crack. He opened the metal lid. Immediately, a smell wafted through the room. It was faint, but to anyone who had ever served, it was unmistakable. It was the smell of old paper, degrading glue, and the distinct, dry scent of Middle Eastern sand. Whitman reached into the box and pulled out a black, leather-bound notebook. The cover was warped from heat and moisture. The edges of the pages were frayed. This, Whitman announced, holding the book up like a holy relic, is the original battalion incident log from Supply Route Bland. It was recovered from the lead vehicle before it was decommissioned for scrap metal. Marcus stared at the book. He blinked rapidly. This wasn't in his spreadsheet. Let's look at the difference between your truth and the Army's truth, Whitman said. He placed the open book under the document camera. 2 images appeared side by side on the large projection screen behind him. On the left was Marcus's evidence, a clean, crisp Excel spreadsheet. The lines were perfectly straight. The font was Arial, size 12. Under the date April 12th, next to my name, it simply read, Status, Routine Transport. No significant duty recorded. It was sterile. It was safe. It was a lie wrapped in administrative formatting. On the right was the projection of the logbook. The handwriting was jagged and hurried, written by a hand that was shaking from adrenaline and shock. The ink was smeared in places. I read the words I had written 2 years ago, and my heart hammered against my ribs. Zwo 9:30. Hours, ambush at checkpoint, Charlie, commander down. Catastrophic loss of comms. Sergeant Johnson assumed acting command. Evacuated 15 personnel. Ammo depletion, critical. But the words weren't what made the room gasp. It was the stain. On the bottom right corner of the page, covering part of my signature, was a large, dark brown smudge. It had dried and cracked over time, soaking deep into the fiber of the paper. Do you know what that is, Mr. Johnson? Whitman asked, pointing to the screen. Marcus didn't answer. He couldn't. He looked like he was about to be sick. That is dried blood, Whitman answered for him. Likely from the officer your sister was dragging out of a burning truck while you were probably deciding which tie to wear to a lunch meeting. Whitman wasn't done. He reached back into the box and pulled out a single sheet of paper protected by a plastic sleeve. It was a memorandum for record, an MFR. I also have this, Whitman said. This is a sworn statement signed by Captain David Miller, the officer who was wounded that day. He sent this from Walter Reed Hospital 3 days ago when he heard about this inquiry. Whitman adjusted his glasses and read aloud. If Sergeant Aisha Johnson had not violated protocol to assume command, my name would be on a memorial wall right now. She did not impersonate an officer. She stepped up when the chain of command was severed by enemy fire. Any attempt to punish her for this is an act of cowardice. Whitman lowered the paper and looked at Marcus. The look was withering. You called this title fraud, Mr. Johnson. You called saving 15 American lives a resume pad? Marcus opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was sweating profusely now, the perspiration soaking through the collar of his expensive shirt. He looked frantically at his charts, then at the colonel. But, Marcus stammered, his voice thin and reedy. It wasn't in the system. If it's not in the portal, we can't verify. The procedure is clear. Slam. Whitman brought his open palm down on the desk with a force that made the water pitchers jump. My mother jumped in her seat, clutching her pearls. Because war does not happen on your computer, Whitman roared. The sound of his voice filled the room, shaking the walls. Real life is not a spreadsheet, son. Your papers are administrative trash. Her papers are history written in blood. He pointed a finger at Marcus, his hand trembling with controlled rage. You wanted to audit her record? Fine, you just audited it. And do you know what we found? We found a hero sitting across from a leech. I looked at my parents. My father, Bob, was sitting frozen, his face the color of gray ash. He was staring at the brown stain on the screen, the blood of the man I saved. For years, he had listened to Marcus describe me as a glorified delivery driver. He had believed the clean, profitable version of the story. Now, faced with the ugly, violent reality of what I actually did for a living, he looked terrified. My mother wasn't looking at the screen. She was looking at Marcus. Her expression wasn't one of motherly concern. It was the look of an investor realizing the stock she went all in on was crashing to zero. She realized in that moment that she had bet on the wrong child. She had thrown away the warrior to protect the coward, and now the whole world could see the ledger. I sat back in my chair, watching Marcus crumble. The tightness in my chest was gone. The air in the room felt cleaner, lighter. The Excel sheet on the screen looked so small next to the blood-stained logbook. The truth didn't need formatting. It just needed to be seen. The silence in the hearing room was no longer heavy. It was absolute. It was the kind of silence that follows a massive explosion, where the dust is settling and everyone is checking to see if they are still alive. Colonel Whitman stood up. He didn't just stand. He unfolded himself from the chair, seemingly growing taller, his uniform perfectly pressed, his ribbons catching the fluorescent light. He adjusted his jacket with a sharp tug, a movement that signaled the end of the debate. Based on the primary source evidence provided by the National Archives, Whitman's voice boomed, filling the room without the need for a microphone. And the sworn testimony of Captain Miller, I find the service record of Sergeant Aisha Johnson to be impeccable. He looked at me. For the first time, his eyes were warm. The allegations of stolen valor are dismissed with prejudice. Sergeant Johnson, your actions on Supply Route Bland were in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Army. You are cleared of all charges. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding since I was 12 years old. My shoulders dropped. The invisible weight that Marcus and my parents had strapped to my back, the weight of being the disappointment, the failure, the liar, simply evaporated. But Colonel Whitman wasn't finished. He turned his gaze toward the other side of the table. If he had looked at me with respect, he looked at Marcus with the kind of cold, clinical detachment a surgeon uses before cutting out a tumor. Now, regarding Mr. Marcus Johnson, Whitman said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. Marcus was sitting slumped in his chair, staring at the blood-stained logbook on the screen. He jumped when his name was called. "Mr. Johnson," Whitman continued, picking up a pen, "you knowingly submitted a secondary, incomplete dataset to a military tribunal. You did this to frame a decorated soldier. And worse, you did it to preemptively disqualify a federal auditor because you knew her integrity would threaten your profit margins." Whitman looked down at a document on his desk. The scratching sound of his pen signing the paper seemed deafening in the quiet room. "In the world of defense contracting, integrity is the only currency that matters. You just spent yours." Whitman held up the paper he had just signed. "I am hereby initiating the immediate revocation of your top-secret security clearance. Furthermore, I am referring Johnson Defense Solutions to the Criminal Investigation Division and the Department of Justice for an inquiry into contract fraud and malicious prosecution." The color didn't just drain from Marcus's face, it vanished. He turned a shade of gray that looked like wet cement. For a civilian, losing a security clearance might sound like a minor inconvenience, but for a defense contractor in Virginia, it is a death sentence. Without that clearance, Marcus couldn't step foot on a military base. He couldn't read a classified briefing. He couldn't bid on a single government contract. In 10 seconds, Colonel Whitman had turned Marcus's multi-million-dollar company into a worthless shell. You can't," Marcus whispered, his voice cracking. He tried to stand up, but his legs gave out, and he collapsed back into the leather chair. "My contracts. The backlog. We have payroll on Friday." "You should have thought about that before you came for one of my soldiers," Whitman said, closing the file folder with a final thud. Marcus looked down at his $3,000 Armani suit. 10 minutes ago, it was armor. It was a symbol of his power, his status, his superiority over my dirty uniform. Now, as he sat there shaking, sweating through the silk lining, he looked like a child playing dress-up. He looked like a clown. I watched him, expecting to feel pity. I waited for that familiar sisterly instinct to kick in, the one that used to make me cover for him when he broke things as a kid. But I felt nothing, just a cool, detached satisfaction. And then, the final act of the tragedy began. My mother, Linda, finally moved. She didn't reach out to comfort her devastated son. She didn't ask if he was okay. She didn't look at me with apology. She turned on Marcus like a viper. "Revoked!" she screeched, her voice losing all its cultivated southern charm. She grabbed Marcus's arm, her fingers digging into the expensive fabric of his sleeve. "Marcus, what does he mean revoked? What about the renewal on the lake house? What about the club dues?" "Mom, please," Marcus stammered, holding his head in his hands. "Not now." "Don't you not now me," she yelled, shaking him. "You told us this was a sure thing. You told your father and me that Aisha would be handled and the contracts were safe. You promised us everything was taken care of." I watched them, fascinated. It was grotesque. It was horrifying. My mother wasn't crying because her son was facing a criminal investigation. She wasn't crying because she had almost sent her daughter to jail. She was panicking because her ATM had just been smashed. My father, Bob, sat with his head in his hands, unable to look at either of them. The illusion of the perfect Johnson family lay in shatters on the floor, mixed with the invisible debris of Marcus's career. They were eating each other alive. I stood up slowly. My chair scraped against the floor, but they didn't hear it. They were too busy arguing about money. I looked at Colonel Whitman. He gave me a sharp salute. I returned it, holding it for a second longer than regulation required. Then I turned my back on the screaming, the crying, and the blame. I walked toward the heavy oak door. I didn't look back at the brother who tried to destroy me or the mother who loved her lifestyle more than her children. I pushed the door open and walked out of the darkness, stepping into the blinding, beautiful light of the hallway. The double doors of the courthouse swung shut behind me, sealing away the recycled air and the smell of fear. I stepped out into the North Carolina afternoon. The sun was blinding, reflecting off the asphalt of the parking lot in shimmering waves of heat. It was humid, the kind of heavy, sticky weather that sticks to your skin. But for the first time in months, I didn't feel suffocated. I felt like I could finally breathe. I adjusted the strap of my duffel bag and walked briskly toward my truck. I didn't run. I had nothing to run from anymore. But then, I heard the footsteps. They were hurried, frantic steps, the slap of expensive leather soles and the click of high heels struggling against the pavement. Aisha, wait, honey, please. It was my father's voice. In 32 years, I'd heard him shout, lecture, and command. But I had never heard him sound like this. He sounded breathless. He sounded desperate. I didn't stop, but they were faster. By the time I reached the driver's side door of my Ford F-150, they had cut me off. My mother, Linda, reached out and grabbed my arm. Her face, usually a mask of composed perfection, was a wreck. Her mascara was running in dark streaks down her cheeks, ruining her foundation. Aisha, stop, please, she panted, clutching my sleeve with a grip that felt like a trap. You can't just walk away like this. We need to talk. I looked down at her hand on my uniform. I didn't pull away immediately. I just looked at it, then up at her eyes. There is nothing to talk about, I said. My voice was calm. It wasn't the voice of a daughter arguing with her mother. It was the voice of a stranger. Of course there is, Linda cried, the tears flowing freely now. We are family. Aisha, you have to understand. We were misled. Marcus, he told us it was just a formality. He said he was doing it to help you get disability benefits. He lied to us. She sobbed, a loud, racking sound that would have broken my heart yesterday. But today I saw it for what it was. It was a performance. It was the crocodile tears maneuver she had used 1,000 times to get her way with my father. He lied to us, she repeated, squeezing my arm. We didn't know he was doing that. We are victims here too. You can't leave us in this mess. You have to go back in there. You have to speak to Colonel Whitman. Tell him it was a misunderstanding. If Marcus loses his clearance, the company goes under. We lose the house. We lose everything. There it was, the pivot. In less than 30 seconds, she had gone from, I'm sorry, to fix this for us. I gently, but firmly, peeled her fingers off my arm. It felt like removing a leech. No, Linda, I said. You weren't tricked. How can you say that? She gasped, looking at my father for support. I say that because I was there, I said, my voice dropping to a low, flat tone that cut through her hysterics. I was in the bathroom with you 20 minutes ago. Marcus wasn't there. It was just you and me. And you didn't talk about helping me. You told me to admit to being mentally unstable. You told me to destroy my own life to save his contract. I took a step closer to her, forcing her to step back against the hot metal of my truck. You made a choice in that bathroom, I continued. You put my life on one side of the scale and your country club membership on the other, and you didn't even hesitate. You chose the money. Don't blame Marcus. You are his accomplice. My father, Bob, stepped forward. His face was red, his tie loosened, looking like a man whose world was spinning off its axis. He tried to summon the ghost of his old authority. Now you listen here, young lady, he sputtered, pointing a shaking finger at me. You do not speak to your mother that way. We raised you. We provided for you. You owe us respect. I looked at his finger. Then I looked him dead in the eye. The fear I used to feel for this man, the need for his approval, was gone. It was like looking at a stranger. I don't owe you a thing, I said. And you don't get to play the father card anymore. You lost that right the moment you walked into that courtroom holding a sworn affidavit to send me to prison. Bob's mouth snapped shut. He looked at his hand, the same hand that had held the pen to sign away my future. And he lowered it slowly. You aren't my parents, I said, looking at both of them. Parents protect their children. You are just people who share my DNA. And frankly, that is an association I can no longer afford. Aisha, don't say that, my mother wailed, reaching for me again. Where will you go? This is your home. I opened the truck door and climbed into the cab. The seat was hot, smelling of old coffee and freedom. I looked down at them one last time. They looked small. They looked pathetic. They were terrified, not of losing me, but of facing the consequences of their own greed without a scapegoat to blame. I don't have a home here, I said. And you don't have a daughter anymore. Do not call me. Do not come to the base. Do not look for me. I paused, letting the finality of the words sink in. As far as you are concerned, I died in the desert 2 years ago. I slammed the heavy door shut. The sound was final, like the closing of a casket. I turned the key. The engine of the old Ford roared to life, a loud guttural growl that drowned out my mother's screams. I saw her banging on the glass, her mouth moving, forming words I couldn't hear and didn't want to hear. I shifted the truck into drive. My driving instructor had taught me to always check my mirrors before pulling out. But today, I broke the rule. I kept my eyes fixed on the windshield, on the open road stretching out toward the main gate of Fort Liberty. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I knew what was behind me. It was a tumor I had just cut out of my life. I pressed the gas pedal and drove away, leaving the wreckage of the Johnson family choking on my exhaust fumes. The main gate of Fort Liberty faded into the distance behind me. The asphalt of the highway stretched out ahead, shimmering in the afternoon heat. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the cab of my truck didn't feel lonely. It felt empty, yes, but it was a clean emptiness. It was the kind of space you create when you finally throw out the trash that has been rotting in your house for years. My phone, mounted on the dashboard, buzzed. Then it buzzed again and again. A rapid-fire staccato of notifications. I glanced over. It was the group chat for my unit, Logistics Squad Alpha. Hey Sarge, ETA on your arrival. We're holding a booth at Joe's. Don't tell me you let the suit and tie guys keep you all day. I ordered 3 baskets of spicy garlic wings. If you're not here in 10 minutes, Ramirez is going to eat them all. We got your back, boss. Hope you gave him hell. I read the messages, and a sudden sharp lump formed in my throat. I had just walked away from the people who share my last name, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. They had left me in a parking lot without a second glance once they realized I couldn't save their bank account. But here, on a glowing screen, were people who shared no DNA with me. They were from Ohio, Texas, the Bronx, and California. We didn't look alike. We didn't come from the same background. But they were sitting in a dive bar called Joe's, staring at the door, worrying about me. They weren't waiting for a check. They were waiting for their sister. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. It tickled, but I didn't wipe it away. For the first time today, it wasn't a tear of rage or humiliation. It was a tear of gratitude. My mind drifted back to my grandmother. She was the only person in the Johnson family who ever looked at me and saw me, not just the disappointing spare heir. She used to sit on the porch in her rocking chair, holding her worn-out King James Bible, and she would tell me, "Baby, people will let you down. Folks are flawed. But you remember the word." One verse, in particular, echoed in my mind now, as clearly as if she were sitting in the passenger seat. Psalm 27, verse 10. When my father and my mother forsake me, then the Lord will take me up. I used to think that verse was just poetic comfort for orphans. I never thought I would live it. But today, in that courtroom, I realized the truth of it. My father and mother had forsaken me. They had cast me aside for a golf club membership and a defense contract. But I hadn't been left alone. I had been taken up. Providence had sent Colonel Whitman, a stranger with a granite face and a steel spine, to stand in the gap where my father should have been. God had sent Captain Miller to write that letter from his hospital bed. He had sent Ramirez and the squad to wait for me with cold beer and chicken wings. I wasn't an orphan. I was just being adopted into a better family. I pressed the button on the door, and the window rolled down. The rushing wind of North Carolina roared into the cab. It smelled of sun-baked asphalt, diesel, and the sweet, sharp scent of the longleaf pines that lined the highways here. It smelled like freedom. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the black sheep of the Johnson family anymore. She wasn't the emotional little sister or the failed daughter. I saw Sergeant Aisha Johnson. I saw a combat veteran who had saved 15 lives. And now, I saw the newly appointed contracting officer representative for the Northeast region. A grim satisfaction settled in my chest. Marcus didn't know it yet, but even without his security clearance, his troubles were just beginning. Because now I was the one who would be auditing the rest of the industry. I would ensure that no other soldier would ever be endangered by a greedy contractor cutting corners to buy a Porsche. I was in control. My destiny didn't belong to Bob, Linda, or Marcus. It belonged to me. I gripped the steering wheel, feeling the texture of the leather under my calloused palms. I turned up the radio. I pressed the gas pedal a little harder, eager to get to Joe's, eager to sit with the people who actually mattered. They say blood is thicker than water. But I have learned that the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. Family is not a noun. You do not get to be family just because we share a last name, or because you appear in the background of my childhood photos. Family is a verb. It is an action. Family is showing up. Family is believing you when the world calls you a liar. Family is the people who stand beside you in the trench when the bullets start flying, not the ones who hide behind you to save themselves. I realized then that I would never again let anyone use the word bloodline to make me bow my head to injustice. If the house you were born into is toxic, you burn it down and build a new one. If the people who raised you treat you like an option, you choose yourself. My name is Aisha Johnson. I lost a brother and 2 parents today, but I found something much more important. I found my home, and I am finally free. Through this ordeal, I learned a hard but necessary truth. Self-preservation is not selfishness. For years, I believed I had to set myself on fire just to keep my family warm. But I realized that loyalty must be a two-way street. If the people supposed to protect you are the ones pulling the trigger, you have every moral right to leave the battlefield. Setting boundaries with toxic relatives doesn't mean you are bitter. It means you respect yourself enough to demand the treatment you deserve. Please remember this. You cannot heal in the same environment that broke you. Sometimes walking away is the bravest thing you will ever do. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever found a chosen family that treated you better than your own blood, just like I found with my unit? Or have you ever had to make the tough decision to go no contact to save your own peace? Please share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might give someone else the courage to finally choose themselves today. If my victory gave you a little bit of strength, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so we can continue to share these truths together. Thank you for listening to my story, and stay strong.